Welcome everyone to this live conversation with artist Claudia Nicholson and curator Yvonne Muniz-Reid. My name is Stephanie Sacco and I'm a curator at Town Hall Gallery. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners as the custodians of this land, including the Wurundjeri people in the northern part of our city, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and the elders from other communities who may be here today. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Rachel Keir-Smith, fellow curator at Town Hall Gallery, and thank her for her support in delivering this event today. During the next hour, we will join Claudia and Yvonne in a conversation about the themes that run through Claudia's project, All I Have Are Dreams of You, including the role of performance and memory in the construction of diasporic cultural identities. All I Have Are Dreams of You features in Town Hall Gallery's current exhibition, Do I Have to Spell It Out For You? An exhibition that features 8 artists incorporating language and text into their work. After the conversation between Claudia and Yvonne, there will be an opportunity for questions from the audience. At any time during this session, please feel free to type your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and I will read out your questions out to our guests towards the end of the session. And please also note that we are recording this event. I'd now like to introduce our guests for today's session. Claudia Nicholson examines psychic and physical connections to place through multidisciplinary forms of art making, including painting, installation, performance, and video. She is interested in creating acts of collective remembrance, exploring the ways in which we navigate the complexities of identity in a post-colonial context. The conceptual inquiries in Claudia's practice are driven by her position as a Colombian-born artist living in Australia. Her practice addresses the diasporic position, specifically in the Asia-Pacific region, and connects with the varied experiences of the Australian Latinx community. Yvonne Muniz-Reid is an independent curator, writer, and researcher with a keen interest in Latin American and Australian practices and decolonial discourses from the Global South. He is an associate curator at the Sydney-based agency, The Curators Department, and was previously assistant curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art Australia. Recent projects include Joaquin Segura Paya at Cushion Works, San Francisco, the first Sydney presentation of work by prominent Mexican artist Joshua Ocon at the Ideas Platform Art Space, and the exhibition Tony Garofalakis and Joaquin Segura, Repertoires of Contention at Gertrude Contemporary in Melbourne. He is currently based in San Francisco, working with Cadist Art Foundation on a collection-based initiative. However, today he is joining us live from Sydney alongside Claudia. Welcome, Claudia and Yvonne, and thank you for joining us today. And I'll hand over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Stephanie and Rachel, for having us, Town Hall Gallery. It's very exciting. I also want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we stand, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I also wanted to thank you, Claudia, for inviting me. And I also wanted to start by saying that as a Mexican immigrant coming to Australia, I remember always struggling with the fact that I never felt myself represented. And so I also wanted to thank you for your practice, because I'm sure I'm not alone, and many others would join me in, being happy that there is this diversity and that you're giving a space and you're giving a voice to an identity that is not often talked about or discussed in Australia.
Oh, that's such a nice thing to say. Thank you.
And well, I thought today we're going to talk about Claudia's work, All I Have Are Dreams of You, which is a work she did in 2017, commissioned by Carriage Works for The National, which is a biannual art exhibition that sprawls across 3 venues. There's a ton of ideas, there's lots of elements to the work, and so we're gonna break that into pieces and do it one by one. But broadly, it's a memorial about Selena Quintanilla, which we'll talk about in length. This is Selena, represent, I disappeared. And it also deals with issues of identity, of hybrid identity, of what it means to be Latino, Chicano, the diaspora, and your personal experience coming to terms with your own identity. So I think my opening question would be, I'd love to know how the work came about, what you were thinking at the time, what your influences were, and what the process was like.
All right. Did you want to play 30 seconds of it?
Yeah, let's do that. So we're going to play a snippet of the work. Well, you can see it's an aerial view. And so these are the elements that I was talking about. There is a floor, a sawdust carpet, and performers, you'll see performers come in and do a dance on top of the work. And so this is just a snippet to give you guys an idea. There will be a link to the full work if you want to view it afterwards. But yeah, this is just so that you know what we're talking about.
I could have kept going all day.
So the performance that were on the screen, that was was Azahares Deslasa. And I guess your question was how the project came about. So in the year before, and so in 2016, I did a work with the MCA through the C3 West project, Women of Fairfield, and I worked with this particular dance group as well as the Spanish-speaking community choir that is located in Fairfield, and to create an alfombra de acerrín, which is the sawdust carpet in Fairfield Chase, a local shopping centre where lots of Latinx community would get together. And so this is sort of an extension of that previous relationship that had been built the year before. And I had sort of started thinking about Selena, and I was interested in the fandom around her and why she seemed to hold such a hardcore fan base so many years after she passed away, and like a young fan base, like one of the groups we worked with for the project, Amanecer, was like a teenage Andean folkloric band, and one young person in particular was a really big Selena fan, a young Colombian girl, and I was interested in why she was why she had such a broad appeal to the Latinx diaspora in Sydney. Yeah, so that's how the project came about.
Lovely. I mean, it's very nice to see the community aspect of the work, and it's very important work, you know, to bring people together like that in an environment where otherwise there'd be very little outlet for that. It is very nice, but I think I guess I wanted to ask about the alfombras de acerrín, or maybe should we talk about Selena? For those who don't know about Selena, she died in 1995. Yeah, she's an iconic Mexican American. She was an Mexican American pop star. The genre was like Tejano music, but she was very culturally significant. So she was sort of the first Latin Hispanic celebrity to be on the charts and Billboard Top 200. And her death, she was actually murdered by the president of her fan club, and someone who was actually working with her. She also owned some fashion boutiques, Selena, and she had this woman managing some of the fashion, and no one really knows what transpired, but Yolanda Saldivar is the name of this woman, shot Selena And you know, it was front page of the New York Times 2 consecutive days. It just had a huge cultural impact, and it was one of the first times you were saying that America was sort of seeing the potential, the unity of the Latin community over there. And so she, over the years, she's become this sort of this icon, which represents, you know, the Mexican population in America, Chicanos, and it gave that group a lot of visibility. So she's a particularly strong figure, and it's a very interesting figure for you to use. So maybe would you talk to us like why you chose Selena, and what is it that she represents for you?
I think the fact that she like, oh, you've disappeared how fast. She sort of straddled that hybrid cultural identity, because she was also really popular in Mexico and then other places in Latin America as well. So I was interested in like just seeing someone juggle those things. I think for me, what drew me to Selena really was like the fandom around her and an interest into what that meant. And also I saw that almost as an access point to community. I was just like, yeah, it was something to share with people as well. And I just loved her music. Yeah. I love her music, and I thought,
that's pretty great.
Yeah, I thought she was really great, and I was just interested in finding out more about her and more about the people that love her so much.
It is interesting. One of the things that we spoke about before preparing for this talk, Claudia recommended this amazing documentary by Lourdes Portillo. It's a 1999 documentary. And I think it's called Intellectuals Having a Conversation About Selena or something like that. And it's just a bunch of really smart Latin Chicana women, academics, activists, you know, that have also been advocate for indigeneity or the indigenous identity of Mexican Americans. And they're having a dinner and they're like having a drink and they have a dog in their lap. And they talk about Selena. And I think one of the things that I find particularly striking is they differentiate between who Selena was as a person and then what Selena is as an icon. And it's very different, you know, and it's like she became this character where everyone kind of imbued their own sense of whatever they wanted to see or achieve. Or so she, you know, she almost became like a saint, a figure of a saint.
Yeah, I love thinking of her about having taken on that saintly aspect. And I think that's maybe what she was for me as well, like this like potential I saw of identity, or yeah, there was something in that, like who you could project onto her identity in that way. And having grown up in Sydney, and I was adopted, so I don't really have like a big connection to the Latinx community here. I don't know, I saw that as a way to project something and to become part of something, I guess.
That is very interesting. There's a sense of like trying to connect with that heritage, but also longing, and maybe you talk about longing and belonging and displacement as an element of that as well.
Definitely, and I think like the song that the text comes from is called Dreaming of You, and in one of the lines it's like, all I have are dreams of you. And I felt like that for me really encapsulated like the way I feel about Colombia or being Latinx, or like about belonging. It's just like I can have these ideas, but sometimes they feel a little bit out of grasp or something. And so through my work, I am quite literally sort of building that back and like trying to regain that a little bit. And yeah,
I think it really does. You do get that sense from seeing the work, and even I'm thinking how when the dancers come in, they start erasing the floor. So it's like you have this, you know, this pattern, this thing that is meant to be fixed or something that's meant to be understood, and then it becomes undone. And I think my interpretation of that is like it's almost like you're equating identity with memory, in how it can be very ethereal, it can be hard to grasp, it can be slippery, and identity is done and undone. And particularly when you're talking about Chicano identity, and when you're talking about your own identity as like someone who grew up between Colombia and Australia and English speaking and Spanish speaking. So there's Selene is like the perfect tie-in for this discourse.
Yeah, and yeah, the materiality of the carpets, you're exactly right. The ephemeral nature of the work sort of speaks to that, like out of reach longing, I think, in the work. But they're also very celebratory as well. So I wanted it to sit, not just sit in a place of loss or grief, to also have that like, celebration of culture as well.
Yeah, it's definitely so joyful. I mean, I didn't see it live, but you can tell that just from hearing the crowds in the video, people are really loving it. Maybe let's talk a bit about the Alfombras de Aserrín. I mean, they're absolutely stunning. And they actually have a really amazing history. So maybe tell us a little bit how you discovered them and how you do them as well, which is like a pretty crazy process.
I can't remember how I discovered them exactly, but I did a fellowship and a research trip to Guatemala during Semana Santa, which is Holy Week, and I was able to participate in and see the festivals where the carpets are made. And
it's like a public thing, right? It's like
so
Holy Week on the street.
Like everything sort of stops for this, and the streets overnight, just community groups make these carpets and they line the streets for as far as you can see. So families, community groups get together, they've chosen a design and they build this carpet in a night, and then almost immediately a religious procession walks over it. And so it happens every day for like 3 days. So it is this sort of like laborious task, and then this immediate erasure of these artworks.
It's nice. It's like the labor is to celebrate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's what they're doing for in this, although it's like incredibly labor intensive and it's so beautiful. I like that it's like it's a clear understanding of what these are made of, and it's just to celebrate and to walk over them, and it's quite nice.
And so I made one actually before I went. I'd already made one. So it was a real guessing game of how to dye sawdust. I started using fabric dyes, and I would wet it in my studio, dye it, cover it in the fabric dye, and then like sort of pat it out and let it dry over a few weeks, and then sift it. You have to sift it to get the big nuggets of it out and squish it flat. And I started by hand cutting stencils and realized I was very bad at that. And so got them all laser cut by a designer. So the first one I did was at Fauré Centre for Contemporary Asian Art, and it was a live installation. So over the period of the exhibition, I was making it and I was figuring out how to make it as I went, because I was like, this isn't working, these colours.
Stressful.
It was really nice. It wasn't too stressful. Maybe it wasn't. I've just erased that part of it.
Projecting my anxiety onto you.
And after that, I sort of finessed the technique. I started using just pure pigments, mixing that in with the sawdust to make the brighter colours. But it's quite nice. Like, it doesn't take a lot of sawdust to make the design, because I make lots of bags. I mix some glitter, make a full colour range, and it's almost like constructing a painting, but with a sieve. So you put something and then you just sift it down over with the stencil, and then you carefully take the stencil up, and if you make a mistake, you've got to patch it and scoop it and do that. So this work took about 8 days with 2 assistants to make.
And I think I've seen some install images, and you've got this like scaffolding and this sort of giant bar that crosses the circle through the middle, so that you can do the sifting from above. Yeah, so it's about I've got like you've got to be quite close to the ground so that the sawdust doesn't go everywhere, and then just lying on it, sifting, and it's amazing. They're beautiful things.
Thank you.
And I guess we should also talk about what the icons, the symbols that you use, and the text over there. So tell us a bit about that.
So the text, as I said, is from the song Dreaming of You. All I have are dreams of you. I sort of spoke about that earlier. As far as the iconography goes, some of the icons carry over from previous carpets I've made. So by this stage, I think I'd made like 4 or more different carpets at different places. And So some of them are carried over specifically. I think you can see here, well, I can't really point, okay. Like there's a little Adidas logo and it says Adidad and there's like a back to front Nike tick. And so they were developed, I bought a bag when I was traveling that had Adidad on it, and I thought it was like as symbols, they were little marks of like a counterfeit process in my understanding and of Latinx culture and making this art, that being like sort of one step removed. I guess that there's this sort of anxiety around that, and these Adidad, like just sort of, I wanted to just give it like a little hint of a bend towards something that wasn't quite right, or not quite right. It was like a replica of something that I'd seen. And then so some of that, like the white rose at the top is sort of synonymous with Selena's death, her funeral. They had lots of white roses and like it's sort of a symbol of remembrance for her. And some of the other icons, like there's some were carried over from car stickers, which I used in the Fairfield artwork as well. And I think you said the other day, you were saying that they had like a really particular sort of Latin American.
It's definitely, you're definitely nailing that aesthetic. And,
yeah.
You know, it's really interesting. And I think you'll have to indulge me with my counterfeit reading, but I was really interested when we were chatting before and Claudia was telling me about the use of these like counterfeit logos like Chanel and Adidas and Nike. And a couple of readings that I had is like, coming from Mexico, I totally understand that because there's a lot of that sort of black market of luxury brands, and there's always been this fetishizing of American culture and wanting to be, you know, whiter, and creams that make you whiter. And so I'm, you know, like this is really something that I understood, and I could see myself walking in a marketplace and, you know, seeing all of these kind of logos and symbols. But then I also had this, I thought this idea of identity as a counterfeit thing, and how maybe that is something not conscious or not conscious, but something that you're also kind of dealing with. I think particularly like when you're trying to take on Latin identity, because Latin identity is a minefield, right? Yeah. It's like, first, like it's so complicated because you're grouping all of Latin America, which is already kind of wrong. So a lot of people are now not saying Latin identity anymore because, you know, there's the Caribbean and like Black Afro-Caribbean, and then there's Brazil and Portuguese, and, you know, it's just there's so diversity. So to kind of say everything underneath North America is this other America is really problematic. And so you have to deal with that legacy, and then you're also dealing with the legacy of Mexican American politics, which is, you know, another kind of very specific thing. And then you're also dealing with your own understanding between like indigeneity and being a mestizo, which is also a very complex word in Latin America. So there's just all these legacies that you're kind of working with. And so when I saw the counterfeit thing, it really was striking. And I thought this makes me, what I'm reading into it is like this imposter syndrome a little bit. It's like, I'm not the real thing, or it looks like it, or I'm interpreting like it, but it's not quite the real thing.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty much how I sometimes feel. Like, I think it's a real like changing process. You know, I really like, I think getting like you said, it's a really complicated sort of umbrella to sort of classify yourself, and even like the need to do that, or so but it's been like a process, and it's sort of understanding identity from an Australian context is really different to when I'm in Colombia, and like it just switches depending on when you are, and just getting my head around those different politics over time has been a real process, and one that has been sort of worked through in my work. But I feel like it's been a really good process, and something that is, you know, it will continue to be going, and
it's giving you like a space to think about it. And I have to say, like, I think it's so relatable. And I mean, my situation is completely different because I grew up in Mexico till I was 20 and then moved to Australia. But there is this thing that happens as well as an immigrant that then I've lived like 15 years in Australia. I feel like there's a funny saying in Mexico, el perro de las dos tortas, like the dog of the two sandwiches, which I think is an adaptation of like an old Greek fable or something, but basically Mexicans made it about sandwiches. But it's about a dog that won't eat his sandwich because there's this other sandwich and then he can't eat either of the sandwiches. And I feel like that sometimes. I go back to Mexico and I'm like, there's all these things that I now don't understand, or I see things in a different way, or even with the language, I get rusty and, I grew up there. And then I come here and I'm never going to be fully Australian. Like I don't, all the time I have all these mistakes and is it in or on or, like silly things like that. English is second language. But that idea that you're always like in between those two things, I don't know if that resonates with you. Or...
Definitely, and I think that's one of the intentions of the work. I think I hope that it not only speaks to like my own experience, but also to those of other diasporic people living in Australia. And I think it does. I think it speaks to that hybridity, but there's the in-betweenness, and like that's a good space as well. Like.
Yeah.
And that is the space that I'm in, and I won't ever be probably one or the other.
Which is good. Even little things like I was watching the documentary, I just realized that all my life I've called Selena, and it's Selena because she grew up in Texas, and so I've been wrong all this time. But...
Well, I was calling her Selena, and then I was like, oh my God, it's Selena. I'm like, so I've now switched over to Selena as well. So it is that sort of...
So it really is like a minefield, right? And it's like, that's why she's such an interesting icon, because she really is descriptive of that place. And I think that's why also, her death was so insane. Like you were saying, they sold out of People magazine within a few days of her death. And, people have never really seen this happen in that way. And she was covered in New York Times 2 days in a row. All of these things happened and it kind of made America realize that there's this like huge population that has not been represented.
And even recently, within the last few years, MAC came out with their first Selena, MAC Makeup came out with their first Selena sort of range. And a friend of mine sent me a video of like the streets around like one of the department stores where it was going on sale, and it was just like, this car was just driving for streets and streets, and there was just young women lined up for blocks and blocks, and that's now. So I think that's she still really brings people together, and
she's really, really cemented her place. I mean, growing up in Mexico, every wedding, every party, it ends up in Selena songs, always, always, always. And I knew her before her death, which a lot of people say her fame was after the death, but I have very specific memories of my brother with his karaoke machine singing No Me Queda Más.
It's a good song to sing.
Like power ballad, and he would sing on repeat. So she's definitely like a major figure, and like you said, it's like she's become like the saint for like little girls, for people that can say, oh look, she's not blonde, you can look like that and be famous. And she's humble, she came from a working class family, she was just generally good with people, and a lot of projections happen towards this figure of Selena, which is fascinating. So maybe I wanted to ask about the performance. So you have 3 different performers.
Yes. So the performance groups was Amanecer, which was the young Andean folkloric group. And also actually one of the young people did a solo to open it. She did Dreaming of You, and then they did another song, I think Como la Flor. And then the dancers danced a Baila Esa Cumbia. And then Kalia Tipa, who is a local performance artist, did an impersonation of Selena for Tibbidi Bidi Bom Bom, which was the final closing act. So it was a tribute concert to Selena with these various people and groups coming together to perform her music. And actually the event happened twice. So this was the opening, and then I remade the carpet after this for the duration of the exhibition. And then the Spanish-speaking community choir that I worked with in Fairfield performed a group of their songs and some of Selena's songs to close the exhibition as well.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
That's very nice. And I guess I wanted to ask you about one particular performance, because I remember you were also talking about the importance of embodiment in remembering. And there's this, was it Kalia Tipa that you made this point of her dancing so much, this is the Selena impersonator, dancing so much like Selena that, you know, in a sense, there was this connection that was very powerful, because Selena's movement come from, like, you know, her own cultural background and learned from, you know, her family and whatnot. And so here you have this performer in Australia moving her body in a way that is, you know, that it's like Selena. So there is a nice lineage and there's like a beautiful connection. And there is that sense of like asserting her own identity through this movement.
And yeah, I think like that idea of sort of gestures and the way that you can move, you know, if we move like Selena moved, we're sort of reaching back into this history and to this lineage, and sort of bringing it forward as well. And that's what I really liked about having Kalia perform. And there's also, yeah, that's something, there's beautiful queer readings into Selena Quintanilla's death, and people who impersonate her, specifically people, drag queens who impersonate her, and other people who just like female impersonators, or yeah, anyway, people, lots of different people impersonate her, and the way that can be a way back to culture, I think, or like sort of a remembering through a body movement, and a culture that potentially people have been separated from due to homophobia or transphobia and stuff. And I thought that, as a queer person, I thought that was an important part of the work for me. Yeah.
I think that's really lovely, because I mean, yeah, thinking of the queer community and the queer Latinx or Chicano community as well, now they have a figure as well, you know, that is like beautiful, that they can, you know, they can try and play around with, or as well, like see themselves reflected in something that is still beautiful.
Yeah.
I think that is a really lovely link. And there is the other queer reading of the work, which might not be as positive, but there is, you know, the speculation that Yolanda Saldívar was actually in love with Selena, or maybe that they had a relationship, because they were quite close. And although Selena had a partner, you know, there's this sort of, it's just this other narrative that people have entertained. But I think that the important queer reading is the inclusiveness of, because she's so camp as well, as she almost invites the drag, you know, to want to become like her. And she's kind of like the Mexican Madonna, you know, the outfit and the vibe sometimes. And I think, you know, Madonna is, you know, equally like a queen of camp. And so there's that really nice relationship. I think that's gorgeous. There was this other thing I wanted to ask you about, and it's a concept that you told me that had become important to you, which was about the right to remember, by Sherry Moriaga.
Yeah, so that's something I think, I mean, that comes back to, actually, I visited Ivan in San Francisco when I was on a fellowship, and one of the best parts about that trip was coming across all these really incredible Chicana writers, and Sherry Moraga. How do you say her last name?
Sherry Moraga?
Yeah, she writes about this right to remember. So where, I guess, colonialism has sort of created this separation from like collective memory, from culture, from language, and you know, particularly I feel like an extra step for me. And she really speaks about the right to remember. So even if you don't have those particular memories, you can build them, or like reconnect through language, through, I guess for me, through making things, and and that will help you sort of build a way back to some kind of connectedness or a new relationship with culture. And I think, you know, in the absence of having that connection, for me, that is a really wonderful way to put it, this sort of like right to remember. And maybe that sort of, like we're talking about, that sort of anxiety in the adadat and the counterfeit. And I think maybe that sort of
like almost feeling like you don't, how can I remember, like how, and giving yourself the power and agency to
be like, I am part of a history, I'm part of a lineage, I'm part of, like, I have ancestral connections to places, and that I have a right to think about, talk about those things, which I haven't always necessarily felt like I had a right to do. So I found that that reading of memory really nice.
And yeah, I mean, I think at first, I think the work definitely reads as like celebration and I guess memorial, but I think thinking about that aspect of it, of you know, the right to remember and who has written history and who has been disadvantaged by you know, the biases and how history has been written. I think it has a really political kick, right? And I like that it looks towards the future. It's in constructing an identity for the future, or making a place where people can project themselves, can see themselves represented. And I mean, I love, Sherry, if you can look at that documentary that Claudia recommended, she's in it, the Lourdes Portillo in 1999, and they're all just really amazing women. And they do an amazing job of really, you know, getting all the meaty subjects from Selena and what it means. But Sherry, is like, a lot of her work is about indigenous consciousness and how it was erased by colonialism, or at least it's been hidden, or it's been dormant. And through her work, she wants to bring this consciousness back. And she thinks that remembering is a political move, and that it is through remembering that we can bring this consciousness back and assert, you know, our position in the current climate or something. But yeah, it's like she's so amazing. I love the documentary as well. In terms of oh, sorry, what was I going to say? Lost my train of thought. Yeah. So what else are you? Oh, I'm disappearing. What have you been working on now? You've got a project coming up in December as well, Town Hall Gallery. No, sorry,
with UTP. Urban Theatre Projects. I'm working on a new video work, really thinking through that idea of the right to remember. The video work is part of Dream Sequence, which is a program that each month a different artist does a live performance, and people can watch that. And the residency is at home. So it was sort of conceived of during the height of lockdown in Sydney. And so my residency is in December, and I've started making video work that sort of brings together a lot of personal archival material of different times that I've visited, broadly the Americas, and Colombia as well. And sort of this, I'm thinking about dreams and their relationship to memories, or like a psychic connection to place, and these sort of like dreamscapes. So it would seem very literally dream sequence. I'm sort of hopefully creating this dream space or dream landscape of my own memories and places and footage, and weaving that together, really thinking about that right to remember. So that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Do you feel that making this work changed a lot the way you're thinking of identity? Like, were you able to resolve the all our dreams? Like was there some sort of change in how you thought about things? Or
I think like the community aspect of this was really important, because it was building on a relationship that I'd started to build, and one that I will hopefully continue to work on. And it was a really genuine connection to people who had been living in Australia for a long time, but were from different parts of Central and South America. So for me, it really like sort of making that connection was really important personally. And I feel like a lot of participants, there did seem to be a lot of like reciprocal joy in the work. So that sort of changed something, I think. And I don't know, I just feel like it's a continuously evolving process. I think identity politics can be really heavy and overbearing sometimes as well. And I don't necessarily want my work to just be about that. I want it to like sort of step past that at the moment, into maybe a new terrain. But I feel like at the heart of my work, it is like always going to be about this relationship to place and to belonging, and it's just always what I've made work about. So I can't imagine it changing dramatically.
Well, I have to say it's very joyful. So you're dealing with all these really full-on ideas, but yeah, I think the experience is pure joy, and you know, so that's not one thing you need to worry about. And also, I think it's I think it's beautiful how you put yourself in the work, and I think it's quite brave, and I think it's very generous, and I think you know, I think, and not just me, people can see that this is from your lived experience, and there's like an honesty that it's very palpable, and yeah, it's a lovely thing.
Thank you.
Do you think Selena will come back into your work?
I don't know. I think so. I can't say for sure. I did visit the Selena Museum when I went to Corpus Christi and visited the Selena Museum, and I was lucky enough to meet her sister while I was there and see her memorial site, which I'd been wanting to see. I've always wanted to rebuild the memorial site in Sydney, but have never quite made that. So there's a potential for it. And I feel like in visiting the memorial site, I sort of understood even a little bit more about the sort of collective memorializing of Selena and how that plays out and the politics around that. So I think there's room to make more work about her, but it's not in the immediate pipeline.
Okay, cool. She's got so much material to offer. I think of her passing and the grief, the way that the public expressed so much grief. It was a bit like Lady Diana, you know?
Yeah, I was thinking about that as well.
It's like the person that you can relate to, that is like, it's like you, it's like an everyday person. She was a nice person. And just people really suffered and had like a really public way of grieving, which was also like very political in the 1990s in the US, where like Latinos are kind of, you know, just starting to gain grounds in terms of like political representation, cultural representation, and all these things.
Yeah, I think one radio station, one sort of host played her music, but then put gunshots behind it as a joke. And I think that for a lot of people really sort of showed up that sort of inherent racism, that even at that point of like extreme grief and community grief, that it was made fun of still.
Yeah.
And there was a huge backlash from that sort of moment in particular. Yeah.
I think 90s there was like a lot of anti-Hispanic sentiment that you know, is still sort of resolving. I mean, it's certainly not resolved, but in the 90s it was like, oh, they're here.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, yes, we've been here for decades, and you know, we've got generations of people here.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just something like Selena that really brought it to the mainstream. So we just go on talking about Selena forever. So maybe should we open to questions?
Yes.
I think this might be a good time if there is anyone in the audience, or I'll pass on to Stephanie actually.
We've got one question, but I would like to encourage others to type them into the Q&A if you have them. So any thoughts or comments on the Super Bowl performance with J-Lo and Shakira, and what impact that may have had for Latinos in a global context?
I don't know if I've seen that, surprisingly. I can talk to, like, I think Shakira for me literally was the only Colombian person that I could see, which now seems really quite comical that me and my sister would like record on our VCR, like Shakira's Hips Don't Lie, to sort of like play it back, and like that was it. That's all we had for like.
Wow.
And then yeah, so I don't know.
I mean, what about Shakira before she was blonde Shakira? She had black hair and she had an acoustic guitar and she played clever songs. She was like a lyricist. She would write her own songs and they were interesting, they were funny or fun. And then she became this other thing, right? But I still think like Super Bowl, having two Latins, and I think Balvin, DJ Balvin, or what's his name? Something Balvin.
I really don't.
He's like a rapper. I quite like him. Or was it Bad Bunny? I don't know. But it was three Latin big figures, and there's other figures now that are super relevant, like Maluma, or it's like they're different times, definitely from the 1990s. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's a net positive. Although I don't think that either J-Lo or Shakira are particularly like representative of a culture in the way that Selena was. Because she came from Tejano music, and although she does have her own really specific pop sound, it still comes from the Tejano origin, and you can sort of see that lineage. Whereas I think Shakira and J-Lo, it's kind of pop. It's almost like a different beast. But it's still, I think it's representation, and I think representation is good.
Yeah. No, I had a little box of special keepsakes from when I was a teenager, and there's this article about Shakira giving shoes away to like kids in Colombia, and I was like, that's amazing. And I found it recently. I was like, wow, that was really like, I kept that newspaper article. Wow. It was like this big.
Go Shakira.
Yeah.
She's good. Also, J-Lo did the Selena movie.
Yes.
For those of you who didn't see it or know that, like, this is what catapulted J-Lo into fame, right? She portrayed Selena in a biopic. Is it a biopic?
Yeah, I think so. And Selena Gomez was named after her. So Selena Gomez's mother was a big Selena fan.
So that's nice. So there's a bit of Selena in the Super Bowl. Yeah. Like it has definitely helped J-Lo get her own place. Get her foot on the scene. So it's good. I think it's positive.
Yeah.
Question for Ivan, please. As a curator, how are you mindful of decolonising museum spaces in your practice?
Yeah, actually, it's a huge question. But I think it's a constant job. It's like you also have to catch yourself, because I just feel like colonialism always creeps in whenever, when you least expect it. So I think maybe I look at it in terms of like, who is this, who has the advantage over this? Like when you're trying to show work that is like non-Western, like who is benefiting from it? I think that's a question that I try to always, ask myself when I'm doing things. But I mean, I think having quotas, like literally like thinking, if I did X exhibition with men, like I should do more exhibition with women. I should focus on that. And also, if I'm doing, all these shows with white artists, like maybe I should have diversity. I think everyone should be thinking of being very purposeful about achieving that balance, but also being purposeful of like not using subjectivities that are non-Western for your own advancement. And I think that happens often even in academia, the big academics that are writing all this deep theory, they're having huge successes in Western universities. And often their ideas come from indigenous thought. And then, that is rarely acknowledged. And then the people who benefit in the end were, it's like we live on a super hard system to break. It's colonial through and through. It's like Western, patriarchal, capitalistic, and there's so many structures that have this inbuilt bias. So I think like just be a police of intersectionality all the time. Police yourself and look around, and there's always going to be something else you could do or change.
I mean, I think about that in where, like, especially when I'm working with different communities and different people, like just making sure that the environment that is being created, it's not just for like, a wide audience, essentially. I try to sort of bring a politics to the work. through, I guess, maybe properly consulting with the people I'm working with, through big conversations with curators about how to make that space not for just for people to come and look at, like for spectators. It's sort of like, how do you make it not that? And I think that is a really ongoing and difficult process that I'm constantly working with.
How to target your work to, like, maybe not the usual suspects, you know, the preach to the preacher, like preach to the converted. It's like, it's hard. You have to reach out and you have to put yourself out there. I think what you're doing, bringing communities that wouldn't normally be in this context, that's exactly what it is. It's like, you just have to, like, reach out. It's nothing.
Claudia, a lot of what you said definitely resonated with me in terms of identity. I know, I think, you know, your experience is something that's, you know, can be felt by a lot of different people all around the world. And I suppose I just wanted to ask you, when you do go to Columbia, whether or not you feel connected or disconnected to the place, or, you know, that sense of belonging.
Yeah, I do. I feel like a very deep connection to the place. I think there was like, I don't know, there's just different moments where there's like, in different landscapes and different places, where there's just like, yeah, there's like a deep feeling of connectedness, but then it can be jolted out of that really quickly when you don't understand. Like, I speak Spanish but not perfectly, and so you're constantly sort of being pulled in and out of this connectedness, where I think learning the language, or Spanish, not even the language, one of the languages spoken there, and getting to know the place and getting to know the politics is a really long process, that is an ongoing process. The more I do that, the more connected I feel. But I think, you know, in essence, I do feel very connected to Columbia as a place. Yeah.
I think our audience has gone a bit shy. So yes, if anyone's got any other questions, please feel free to type them in down below in the Q&A. How do you feel about, do you get a sort of sense of even just a little bit of sadness when your work is destroyed as part of the process?
No, unless someone accidentally walks over it, which happens every and that's more of like a frustration than a sadness, I think. But you know, that's the nature of making work on the floor, so I also understand that. No, I really love watching them sort of go full circle, that sort of creation, destruction, ephemerality. They're not made to last. They're made to be like passing. And I think I'd be more sad when they don't get that, get to fulfill that process.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Did you have anything else to add? Otherwise, we might close it off there.
No, I'm good. Thank you so much for putting on the show, and yeah, for inviting me to be a part of it. It's been really great.
Thank you for being a part of it. It's been so wonderful working with you. Okay, so I guess that brings us to the end of our session. Thank you so much to Claudia and Ivan for sharing your insights with us. It's been so fascinating and informative to hear you speak about your work, Claudia, so thank you. If you have any questions that you think of after we close off this session that you would like us to put forward to Claudia and Ivan, please feel free to email them to us. Our email address can be found in your registration confirmation email. You can join our digital community by signing up to our e-news via the City of Boroondara website, and you can follow Town Hall Gallery on social media. You will receive a follow-up email that includes a link to the recording of this session, along with a survey to tell us about your experience. We'd really love to hear your feedback, as we'll definitely be doing more of these online sessions in the future and into 2021. Also included in the follow-up email will be links to the resources that were mentioned in today's session. You can view All I Have Are Dreams of You in full in our online exhibition, Do I Have to Spell It Out for You?, which is online until Sunday the 25th of October. To view the exhibition and for more information about all Town Hall Gallery and Boroondara Arts events and activities, please visit www.burundara.vic.gov.au/arts. Thanks very much, everyone, again today, and take care and stay safe.
Thank you. Bye. Do we leave?
So,